Hey, what's up, everybody? We got another episode of The Strange Road coming at you. I'm your host, Mikey, and of course, as always, Bub, the co-host.
Hello.
And tonight, we have Stoner and Disborough in master control. The prodigal son returns, Disborough. There they are. Look at that guy, hard at work. Stoner and Disborough, you guys rule, making everything look and sound dope as usual.
Looking like Area 51 in there.
All right, man. We got a great episode tonight. But first off, you guys can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Go check out that Facebook group. If you're here on YouTube watching, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share it with your friends. That way you get all the information and know when we're doing live streams and when shorts come out and all these other things we're doing. So if you're listening on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere else, keep writing those reviews. You guys have heard us.
Thank you.
You're hitting those reviews. You're hitting those 5 stars or bust. You guys are all doing it. You're killing it. You're crushing it. And we appreciate the hell out of each and every one of you. Make sure you go follow Necromechanimal on Instagram. He's always doing that artwork for the show. We appreciate him so much. And tonight, we have a fantastic guest for you guys. We have one of the returning champs of the Strange Road, Jeffery Wilson.
That's true.
Jeff, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Returning champ. That's funny.
This is round 3.
This is 4.
4?
Yes.
4, yeah.
This is the 4th episode.
Yeah.
Where did I miss one?
We did the first one here, which was the first in-studio guest we had was Jeff. And then we did the preview for this Friends of the Serpent Mound event, which was here in studio. That's the one you're missing.
Oh, that's the one I'm missing.
And then we did the live from Serpent Mound.
Right, that's,
from the Friends of the Serpent Mound Summer Solstice event.
Oh,
which
you are
guys
definitely
had us
the
out.
international champion.
And that was the Crop Circle. That was the Crop Circle episode. And so here we are with Jeffery, and we are going to be discussing his new book. A lot of our listeners have a little bit of background, but I kind of wanted to do a quick intro, give us a little bit of background, a refresher.
On the book or myself?
On yourself.
Oh, okay.
And then we can kind of talk about everything that's going on.
Well, for the past nearly 20 years, the anniversary will be next year, I have been a volunteer and held a bunch of different offices in the Friends of Serpent Mound, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that really advocates for the education of the public on these prehistoric earthwork sites, advocates for their preservation. We do all kinds of educational programs about those things. We did a lot of volunteer work at Serpent Mound in the early days, and I had a background in astronomy. I took my graduate work was in physics and astronomy at Eastern Michigan University.
Nice.
So I've done a lot of different things, but most recently, obviously, is my book is finally out. This was a monumental project.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Way longer than I ever thought it was going to take. I joked with a friend of mine. When I first began this project, I said, when I first uncovered the original material that made up the initial bulk of the book, I said to him, "Oh yeah, I think I can do this and have it done by February." And this was like beginning of December. And well, that came and went a whole nother year. And that following February, I thought I was done writing. And I saw that I wrote to him and I said, "Yeah, I just got the wrong February." And well, that came and went, and that went another 6 months, and now it's done. Now it's available, and
that's awesome. That's awesome. That's so great.
It's if you saw some of the pictures I posted, I don't know if you saw a picture that I posted about the actual softcover editions. If you stack them up, to me, it was like writing the Yellow Pages phone book. I mean, it's like 3.5 inches.
Good grief.
Over 1,300 pages combined. So it's an enormous project.
Wow.
So I just never thought that it would be that much work. I thought this was going to be a lot simpler, but as I went into it, the more depth I went into it, I just found more stuff that I just could not believe that this material had never been previously published. And that's, kind of some of the stuff that I'm going to show tonight is literally just a tiny fraction of what's in this book. But what I'm going to show you has never been published before. And these are historical maps, historical illustrations, historical drawings from 175 to 200 years ago.
Wow.
About the earthworks in this area. And it was just absolutely astonishing to me that it had never been published, but that it had never even been referenced in the archaeological community.
Right.
And so that's really what the book is about, is largely taking this book that was written 175 years ago called Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley by two authors by the name of Squire and Davis. The book has become somewhat famous for being the reference guide to all the early earthworks in Ohio and some of the surrounding states. And it is continually referenced to this day. People go back and always reference the illustrations that are in that book.
Right.
And so what I found were all of the original source drawings and illustrations that were used for the book, but they've never been seen, they've never been published. And there are a lot of differences between what got published in these original survey drawings by not just Squire and Davis, but by others, which I can talk about. But the sort of amazing thing about them is how that impacts the real world. Like the original survey works place certain mounds and earthworks in certain locations that today we have no idea where those earthworks are located because a lot of it's been destroyed by development and so on and so forth. And so a lot of archaeologists go back to the published maps, but the published maps are different than these original survey maps because of the printing process back in the 1840s. And I could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting story as to how it all came together. But I originally did not set out to write this book. What I originally was working on is I've been working on kind of a comprehensive volume about Serpent Mound for a long time. And one of the things that I decided to do was to go back to this book by Squire and Davis, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, because it had the very first published reference to Serpent Mound in it.
Oh, wow.
And so I wanted to kind of review what they had said and kind of fact check it to see, what was real and what was wrong. A
little side by side.
They only wrote 5 paragraphs about Serpent Mound, so it's not really that difficult to review it. They did make several factual errors in their 5 paragraphs, but the thing that I kind of noticed was there's a famous illustration of Serpent Mound. I think if I move forward a couple slides.
Down is up.
Down is up?
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, there's a beautiful artwork,
those
by the
are
way.
the book covers, but let me go forward here. So this illustration of Serpent Mound, which was in the book, is always been credited. All the illustrations in this book are largely, when the book is referenced by other people, they always reference these illustrations as being by Squire and Davis. But that is not the case. And I realized that by looking at this illustration of Serpent Mound. It is a lithograph. And they hired a lithographer to make this.
Okay.
All of the major full-page illustrations in the original book, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, were done by a lithographic team by the name of Cerrone and Major out of New York City. And so this is the work by Cerrone and Major.
Okay.
That may just astonish people to begin with. Like, wait, you're telling me that everything that's credited to Squire and Davis isn't their work? No, it's not. All of the major illustrations are done by Cerrone and Major. And you may think, well, who are those guys? Well, both of them got their start at another famous lithographic company you may have heard of, Currier and Ives, the famous Christmas card people. So Cerrone and Major were trained by Nathaniel Currier at Currier and Ives, and then they left and went to start their own company. And they did some famous lithographs during the Mexican-American War, which caught the attention of Squire, and he hired them to do the lithographs. There are also a couple hundred other illustrations in the book, smaller ones. Those were done by woodcut engravers. And the woodcut engraving company of Orr and Richardson, Nathaniel Orr and James Richardson, they did all of the smaller illustrations. So everything that's in the book is essentially either Orr and Richardson's woodcuts or Cerrone and Major's lithographs. And what's important about that, and what led me down this path to discover all this stuff, is understanding the process of lithography. All right, so you got to think, what is the technology back in 1847 to be able to make your illustrations in a book? Well, you go to a company, an art company, and you give them an illustration, and they then copy that onto their lithographic plate. And it's a very manual process. It's a stone plate covered in wax, and then they have to take your illustration and redraw it into the wax in mirror reverse. Wow. So they scraping all of that wax away. They apply an acid to the surface. It doesn't eat away at the wax, but it etches the illustration into the stone. They clean that off, apply the ink, stamp that to the paper. That's your image. Okay, that's how those lithographs are made. It's not like Xerox process.
Right.
They don't get it 100% right. And so errors are made between those. And so I thought, well, where can I find the original illustration?
Has anyone ever asked that?
I don't think so. And so I said, could I find this needle in a haystack somewhere still around after 175 years? Well, not only did I find the one for Serpent Mound, but I ended up finding about 95% of all the illustrations that went into making Ancient Monuments in Mississippi Valley. And so when I stumbled upon this stuff, that was a project in and of itself, was just to review the material. As this happened during the pandemic, and so lots of archives were shut down, including the one where I sort of began and found the drawing for Serpent Mound, for instance, was at the Library of Congress. Library of Congress's archives are shut down because of the pandemic, so I'm literally emailing back and forth with curators about what I can, have access to and what I can't. And I was trying to look at, they have a collection of Squire's papers at the Library of Congress. And I wanted to review that material. But because the archive is closed, you can't come in person to look at that in D.C., right? So they said that they had an alternate solution. And that was back in 1971, which is, I was like 2 years old. The Library of Congress Photo Duplication Service photographed the entire collection in black and white. And they could send me the film through interlibrary loan. And it was on 14 rolls of positive film. And so I think I have a slide maybe in here that, let's see if I can get that up, that will show that. We'll skip these guys here for a second and we'll come back to them.
Wow, Jeff.
So here,
thing.
There's Napoleon Cerrone, by the way.
Oh, wow.
I never found a photograph of Henry Major. This lithograph here is of the Americans fighting with the Mexicans in Mexico City.
That's cool.
And this was a very famous lithograph for the time. This Napoleon Cerrone is quite the character too, by the way, but I can come back to him. What I wanted to show, these are the woodcutters. Okay, so this is what I was dealing with. You have a 35 millimeter film strip, which each frame of those images are less than 1 inch by 1 inch.
Right.
And then on that, the photographer from the Congressional Photo Duplication Service has managed to put in the frame multiple pages.
Sure.
Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they're curled or crumpled or whatever. And so this is what I had to deal with.
So it's not great to sift through and break down and really investigate. Maybe it's some that's obscured even, right?
But considering how small these images were,
right.
I ended up having to scan this at 19,200 dots per inch. Normal photographic reproduction is like 600 dots per inch.
300 to 600.
300 to 600.
Yeah.
So I had to scan this at 19,200 dots per inch just to get an image that I could then blow up to normal size to review. All right. I spent weeks in the library reviewing the 12,000 pages in the Squire collection. There's thousands of letters from all kinds of different people.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
And
I hate to interrupt real quick, but just give people an idea of when you're dealing with that kind of resolution, how long that scan takes.
Yeah.
To process. It is moving so unbelievably slow.
Right, yeah.
So each time you're trying to make a scan is like watching paint dry.
Yes. And there were 14 rolls of film that I ended up accessing.
Wow.
12,000 something documents. I had to go through it all. And it was on roll 12 that I found the bulk of the material. And so I was just literally going through, making my eyes bleed, looking at 1800s cursive writing, scratch.
But you're legitimately that meme of the guy digging in the tunnel, and like the one guy turns around and gives up, and you keep digging because you know that payoff's there. You know,
well, I didn't know for sure. I just
you got a hunch.
I had a hunch.
You got a hunch, but you got to follow that hunch. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. So that's
so wild.
So when I discovered the first image, which was on that very first slide, if I go all the way back to the beginning, I'm going forward here.
Man, that's cool.
Those are so cool.
On the very first slide, opening slide, there's a picture in here. The one that's all the way on the far left.
Okay.
That's Mound City in Chillicothe, Ohio. And that one is the first one I saw. I literally called up an archaeological friend of mine in the library, and I said, "You're not going to believe what I just found." And he was astonished by just this one image, that any one of these causes like major ripples in the archaeological community, because none of this stuff has been seen before. And like to find one was like astonishing.
Yeah.
To find hundreds was like almost incomprehensible. And so that's what this whole story is really about, is finding this material.
Sure.
Right. So in any event, I did happen to find the Serpent Mound image, from this, start. And that's when I said to him on the phone, I really think that what needs to happen is to take these original illustrations and integrate them into the original book. So if you take the original book, then once you hit one of these illustrations, you can insert all of these additional illustrations with some historical commentary to talk about where this is found, whatever, and that would make a really cool book. And that's what I decided to do. I had no idea how difficult it was going to be when I started.
Jeff.
Yeah, so.
Well,
just to give you a nice sense of the original authors, this is Efim George Squire in his later years, because Squire, he's the principal author of Ancient Monuments. He wrote all the words in the book, all right, and he redrew many of the illustrations that went to the lithographers and the woodcutters to make the book. He was an interesting character, to be sure. His background is really interesting. He grew up in New York, so he's from New York State. His father was a minister, dragged him around to an itinerant minister, going from place to place or whatever.
Okay.
I think his mother died when he was like 10 or 12 years old. He ended up going to school for civil engineering. But this is the 1830s during Jacksonian America. Andrew Jackson was very famous for causing this massive economic disaster in the 1830s for being opposed to reauthorizing the Bank of the United States, right?
Okay.
And so because Congress didn't reauthorize it, or he was going to veto it, one of the two, it caused an economic crisis in the country. And the other thing that he was opposed to was any government spending on any infrastructure project. And so there was no money for any civil engineering projects across the United States. No bridges being built, no roads being built, no, nothing, no canals, none of that stuff. And so Squire trained to be a civil engineer and then, finished out of schooling and there were no jobs because the economy, and that was pinned on Andrew Jackson and his policies.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
So Squire became a Whig opposed to Jacksonian Democrat.
Right. Whigs are a former political party for anyone that doesn't know about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Powdered
so
Whig days.
About the same time that he was finishing up his schooling, or he had finished, he first became a teacher, didn't like doing that. And so then he decided to become a newspaper writer. And he started his own newspaper. And this was the first of his many financial schemes. He sort of had this kind of fraudulent scheme that he would produce a newspaper, send it out to subscribers who didn't ask for it. And there was a law in the books at the time that postal inspectors, it was called the law of newspapers, and the postal inspectors could go to a person that received a newspaper and collect the subscription fee and then pass that back to the newspapers if they weren't paying their subscription fee. They were like the enforcement arm of the newspapers. And so Squire's scheme was, I'll just send it out to a zillion people and then get the postal inspectors to get the money.
Wow.
And
what a shakedown.
That's a racket, sir.
That's a racket.
That was his first racket. And so he kind of failed at that because the postal inspectors kind of refused to enforce his collection effort. But nevertheless, about the same time that he was working on that, in New York City, there was the first labor organization that kind of arose. It was mechanics union.
Okay.
And this mechanics union kind of got upset with the state of New York because they were using prison labor to do the mechanics jobs.
Sure.
And undercutting their pay.
Shawshank Redemption, yeah. Look away, take the money.
And so they decided to kind of hold a rally in Albany and have a convention there to kind of put some political pressure on the state to stop that practice. And one of the things that they determined to do was to create a newspaper as kind of a lobbying arm. And so this mechanics union newspaper began, and Squire was hired to be the editor of it. And he ended up writing a history of the labor movement in Europe and in America. And he had that published in New York City. He gave an an address to the labor union there and one in Baltimore. He was like a huge labor union organizer before Karl Marx and Engels started their ideas of communism in Europe. He was about 2 or 3 years ahead of them. And you can read through his a history of labor and labor movements. It's really fascinating because almost all of it is kind of attributed later to Marx and Engels. He was ahead of them. And he then got fired from his mechanics union job because he was such a political firebrand. The mechanics union wanted to be apolitical. They did not want to take one side, political side or the other.
Right.
And so he was definitely against Jacksonian Democrats, and so they ousted him. And he went to work for another newspaper in Connecticut in the anticipation of the next presidential election in 1844. And of course, the Democrats won again. Whigs lost again. And that didn't pan out well for him. And so he had to take another job elsewhere. And he got offered 2 jobs, one in Baltimore, Maryland, and one in Chillicothe, Ohio, to be the editor of those different respective newspapers.
Okay.
And Squire said, there is no way I am going to work in a slave state. He was dramatically opposed to slavery, and so drew a line in the sand. Even though the paper was bigger circulation, he would have gotten paid more. He went to work in Chillicothe because he was not going to work in a slave state.
Wow.
So he goes to Chillicothe, and within a couple of days meets his co-author, Edwin Hamilton Davis. And Davis had been a mound aficionado for about a decade before Squire shows up in town. Now, the interesting thing is, so Squire shows up in Chillicothe at the beginning of 1845 at the age of 24 years old.
Wow.
Okay. So he'd done all of that other prior stuff.
That's crazy. He's still a young dude.
Yeah. And
Wow.
Davis
Wow,
was
wow.
31. And he was a medical doctor. So
there's Davis.
Here's Edwin Hamilton Davis. Davis was a medical doctor. He went to Kenyon College here in Ohio. Then he went to Cincinnati for his medical degree. While he was at this other college, he excavated his first mounds, and he gave a commencement speech address regarding the mounds in Ohio. And attending that commencement speech address was Daniel Webster, Senator Daniel Webster from the East Coast, related to the dictionary guy, Noah Webster.
Nice.
And Daniel Webster was looking to maybe have a presidential bid, and so he was touring around the country, and he attended this event, listened to Davis give his speech, and went up to him afterwards and encouraged him to continue to do that and said, hey, maybe you ought to think about putting together an organization to preserve these mounds. That didn't happen, but nevertheless, Davis continued on. When he went to a medical college in Cincinnati, the guy who founded that was a guy by the name of Dr. Daniel Drake, who was another mound aficionado. He started doing surveys of mounds and earthworks starting around 1807 and up into the early 1820s. So Daniel Drake was doing what Squire and Davis did 20, 25 years before them. Wow. And we'll see a couple of Daniel Drake's things. I stumbled upon his papers, and none of that's been published before. And so I published a bunch of Daniel Drake's mound surveys, which are probably the very earliest of any of the mound surveys in that exist. So I put together a bunch of those. Nevertheless, Davis here, I was very interested to find out that there exists a manuscript at the National Anthropological Archives written around 8 years or 9 years after Ancient Monuments came out. And you can see a picture of it there. sketches of ancient mounds, monuments. He put this color manuscript together for publication, and it never was published. And a bunch of the material in there is stuff that showed up in Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley by Squire. Davis's name was added to that manuscript later, and I could talk about how that happened.
Never knew that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But nevertheless, you can see there are a few illustrations from his book there of some of the effigy mound pipes. I've got some more illustrations in here later. We can talk about that. Though I published all of the color illustrations that were relevant to ancient monuments in my new edition because Ancient Monuments was in black and white. And so you can't really get a sense of the true color of any of that stuff.
Right.
But with Davis's illustrations, you can. They're near photographic replicas and color.
Just say he's a pretty damn good artist.
Well, he didn't do a lot of the artwork.
Right.
He hired an artist to do some of that work, but the guy did an unbelievable job, and so they're pretty amazing. And he got a chance to match the color with the actual artifacts. So he was doing these, amazing color reproductions. But for whatever reason, the Smithsonian chose not to publish it. And so now I've been able to publish a lot of it. So
if they won't do it, somebody needs to.
Right. Now, here's a guy that you might never heard of that is kind of crucial to Ancient Monuments in the Mississippi Valley, the original book. This is the editor, Joseph Henry, from the Smithsonian. He's the guy that agreed to publish the book. And there's a statue of him there out in front of the Smithsonian's, what they call the Castle Building in Washington, D.C. When Joseph Henry died, they commissioned this statue, and when they went to unveil it, they made a big production out of it. They hired the composer John Philip Sousa to compose the Venus March for the transit of Venus, which was happening simultaneously. And so you can go online and play that. I don't think he has this hooked up so you can hear the sound, but it is in my presentation there. You can hear the, upbeat John. It's a typical Philip Sousa march, which was written for the unveiling of Joseph Henry's statue at the Smithsonian.
Love it.
But Henry was a physicist. He was interested in electricity and magnetism. He invented the very first electric motor. A lot of the early sort of discoveries of electricity and magnetism attributed to people like Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell actually were done by Joseph Henry at Princeton, but Henry didn't get it published before those guys, so they got most of the credit, but he had already figured it out. So he's an interesting character. But he got hired to become the first sort of general secretary of the Smithsonian, which began in 1845 or 46, just a couple years before Ancient Monuments was published. It was, the Smithsonian was kind of established from a gift from this wealthy industrialist in England who had never even been to the United States, James Smithson, and the gift was, to Congress to establish this, organization, and so they did, and he became their first secretary. And he was intent on putting together an organization to sort of promote science. And, he was a scientist. He wanted to do that kind of scientific work, and this sort of manuscript got steered his way, which was Squire's manuscript, Ancient Monuments in the Mississippi Valley. The reason it came their way is Squire and Davis's partnership of surveying mounds in Ross County, Ohio, where Chillicothe is. The arrangement was Davis was the senior partner, and Squire was considered the junior partner because Davis, who was about 7 or 8 years older, had a medical degree, had a medical practice, and could afford to do this work. Had already been for about a decade looking at mounds and had one of the finer collections of artifacts already at that point. Squire shows up, doesn't know anything about anything, but is interested, and has some civil engineering background. So he kind of can make maps and draw stuff. Yeah, and so he's the junior partner. And so as they went along and excavated more mounds and visited more sites, they would hire teams of diggers to do most of the work. They didn't really do a lot of the work themselves. All these unnamed people that we have no idea who did all the work. They would, collect whatever they found, take it back to Davis's place. Davis would spend his time cleaning the artifacts, categorizing them, collecting them, identifying what the materials were. All the science stuff, Davis did.
Okay.
And then Squire decided he was going to write a book, and he writes this manuscript. Davis doesn't have his name on it. Squire kind of gets frustrated at Davis because Davis, who's paying for everything and getting everything, and Squire feels like he's not getting anything. Squire decides that he wants to expand the operation, but he goes out onto the East Coast and starts meeting with different groups for them to give them funding, right? So that maybe Squire can do it on his own without Davis. And one of the organizations that he met with was the American Ethnological Society in New York City. And the American Ethnological Society was really enthusiastic about what they were finding. Squire presented it as, Squire and Davis's work, and can you help fund us? And they did get a little bit of funding from them. He also met with the American Antiquarian Society out of near Boston, Massachusetts, and they were a little more meticulous in kind of figuring out and checking out their backgrounds. And in fact, the head of the American Antiquarian Society actually went to Chillicothe and visited to see what their operations were like. And while that was taking place, Squire was in New York City lobbying with the American Ethnological Society, who liked their stuff so much that the vice president, who was a publisher in New York City, his name was Barrett, he agreed to publish Squire's manuscript. And when Squire delivered the manuscript, it was so big and had so many illustrations that Barrett said, this organization doesn't have the financial wherewithal to be able to publish such a book. This is going to be such a costly effort. We can't do it, but we'll try to help you find somebody that can. Well, they looked around and went, oh, that group with that gigantic pile of money called the Smithsonian, they have the financial wherewithal. And so they sent representatives from the American Ethnological Society to kind of negotiate this with the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian agreed to do it. And so they wound up with the agreement to publish the manuscript. Now, Squire nearly torpedoed the entire thing because he insisted that the American Ethnological Society hold up their end of the bargain of publishing something from him. And so he published in 7 or 8 months before Ancient Monuments came out, he published something called Aboriginal Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. What? With them. And it was like a mini version of Ancient Monuments. It was over 100 pages. And I include that in the Appendix 3 in my second volume or last volume of my book. So you can get a chance to compare the original Aboriginal monuments with the ancient monuments version.
So funny.
Okay. Now, why this was so controversial was because only Squire's name was on Aboriginal monuments. And when it came out, people that knew what Squire and Davis were working on were like, where's Davis's name? Like, Davis did all the work. Davis paid for everything. Davis has all the artifacts. Davis did all the cleaning of the artifacts and, did all the scientific stuff. Where's Davis's name? Well, there was also stuff in Aboriginal monuments that came from other people. And one of those was a survey map of the fortified hill in Butler County, Ohio, which I helped the Friends of Serpent Mound was the first one to begin raising money to save that site.
Yeah, I remember when you guys did
and,
that.
The site is preserved today, and you can go and visit that.
Nice.
But there was a guy by the name of James McBride who had done a survey with two others of that site, and James McBride's survey map wound up in that Aboriginal monuments, but not credited to the surveyors. And one of McBride's friends who noticed this wrote a scathing letter to one of the Cincinnati papers saying, Squire's trying to steal all of this stuff. And this is not right. Those letters started to make their way to the Smithsonian. So the board of the Smithsonian leaned on Joseph Henry and said, you got to make him, attribute the material that he's using for his book. And so what I uncovered was all these letters that went back and forth between the Smithsonian and Squire and Davis and James McBride and a bunch of other people over the issue of attribution in the book. McBride was eventually promised to have a byline on the front page. It would say Squire, Davis, and McBride. Except that didn't happen. Well, it turns out that out of all the surveys that are in ancient monuments in the Mississippi Valley, 40% of them are from James McBride and his
Wow.
buddies. Squire and Davis only contributed 28%. So it really should have been McBride, Davis, and Squire.
Yeah, right.
But
Just goes to show you how credit is not truly divvied out the way it should be.
no.
Right?
Right, exactly.
Especially back in the day when like everything's just the Wild West. Like that term, the Wild West.
Yeah, yeah.
Literally everything. Medicine.
well, like
Ohio is considered the West at that
Right.
time.
Yeah.
But like he's doing here, how much uncovering do you have to like?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
I've been thinking this whole time is like you're looking in one direction, not one direction, but you're looking in a more specific direction, right? Of what you're uncovering in these time periods of, man, look at these inconsistencies or not credit given.
Yep.
What happens
What
when you
else is
apply that in a 360 view of those time periods and go,
Right.
what was really, it makes you really kind of go, what was really going, not that, the earth's flat and it's not round, but I mean, how did it really shake out? How did it really come about? How did this work come about? Like,
Yeah.
who were all the players in it and really
Yep.
putting in their parts? And it's so important.
So it turns out that Joseph Henry forced Squire to add Davis's name to the book. And in the list of lithographs in the book, he forced Squire to add who the surveyor was and who the illustrator was of all of those in there. That's literally the only credit acknowledged for any of these people, for the most part. For the list of 200 woodcut illustrations, nothing. So I figured out that most of those are done by other people too. But that no credit has been given to, a lot of those people.
So he had a sort of a penance, like, hey, at least do this. All the other guys, whatever, we'll leave them alone.
Yep. So in any event, Joseph Henry there, because he was a scientist, his whole intention was to start this scientific publication series, of which Ancient Monuments became the first one, called the Smithsonian Contributions to Knowledge, Volume 1. And he wanted a peer review process. Now, I didn't discover this. There was another anthropologist from Southern Methodist University, David Meltzer, who wrote the introduction for the 150th anniversary edition of Ancient Monuments, which came out in the late 90s. And he uncovered, when he went in and dove into the history of how this book was created, I kind of highlight it in my book because he wrote a 120-page introduction, and this is just a small little sliver of what he talked about in that introduction. Mm-hmm. But what he said was, and what he found records for, was that because of that process with the American Ethnological Society, Squire presented all of his material to them. They published Aboriginal monuments, which caused the Smithsonian all this heartburn, right? Well, the peer review process was supposed to be that they would get a committee of people to review the manuscript, which would be masked anonymous so that they did not know who wrote it.
Okay.
So the 5 members of the committee that they sent this out to consisted of the president, vice president, and the secretary of the American Ethnological Society, and 2 other board members of the American Ethnological Society. Like, literally, the people who negotiated to have this manuscript go to the Smithsonian, who knew Squire and knew this work and had published a preview of the work, were the ones chosen to review the manuscript anonymously. Wow. Okay. And so it was a sham. It was a fraud. And not only that, what? They got the manuscript, turned it around within 2 weeks, had their response back. And all of this is published at the beginning of the original Ancient Monuments, which is in my book too. You can read all of these fraudulent letters because the dating was all messed up for them to actually do the peer review. And so to solve that issue, Squire suggested that they fabricate some of the letters and they backdate some of the other letters, and they all agreed to it. The Smithsonian agreed to it, the American Ethnological Society agreed to it, and Squire agreed to it. And so that's what appears at the beginning, before the book begins, is this sort of section, they call it the advertisement section, which is the reviews of the book by the committee.
Hold on. Yeah. Wasn't this whole thing started for science and integrity?
Yeah,
and
yeah, exactly.
So the first go around, they're like, throw that out the window.
Right, yeah.
So it was the Smithsonian literally was born in fraud.
This whole project was born in fraud to start with.
I'm telling you.
I got to give credit to David Meltzer, who got hired by the Smithsonian to write this introduction, to really write that out and say, look, this is what happened here. You know, I give him a lot of credit.
Yeah.
Because that took some guts to, look your employer in the face and say, hey, your whole thing started out as a fraud, by the way.
And what year did David Meltzer come out with all that?
Well, it was in the 150th anniversary edition, so I think it was like 98. Something like that.
So not that long ago. That was just discovered?
Yeah,
oh my God.
So
all you people out there, by the way, that are obsessed with the Smithsonian cover-up,
just throw the kerosene on the fire. Jeez, I'm like mind blown right now because it's one of those kind of like confirmation things. It's the admission of it. It's the right. Where there's smoke, there's fire type vibe. And
Jeff's got
just
the receipts,
the Smithsonian in general over the years of there's so many references to it in the Indiana Jones movies and stuff where they got the crates all boxed up of all the stuff,
Yeah.
But it's kind of like you guys are playing into it. You're not really helping really put it to the light because you're doing a bad job from the start. Like hopefully you got it turned around.
Yeah, you would hope.
They haven't.
But in any event, it's a fun little story there.
They have not.
To show a few of the other contributors, the other major contributors, I should say. James McBride up there in the upper left. I mentioned James McBride. He really deserves a lot of the credit for Ancient Monuments. Like I said, about 40% of all the surveys that are in Ancient Monuments, a number of the artifacts pictured were from his collection. He was friends with Davis. And so Davis took Squire out to meet James McBride, and McBride had been surveying mounds in the western half of the state, down the Miami River Valley, essentially, since the 1820s, and maybe even as early as like 1811-ish. He had amassed dozens and dozens of maps of sites. He had a couple of friends who were civil engineers that worked on the Miami Canal out that way, and he and his cohorts, they would go and do all these maps of all these sites over there. He had a huge collection of artifacts that he decided at one point that he was going to compile all of his material. He had these meticulous field notebooks that he had, and then he recopied all of that material in just immaculate pen and ink and had them leather bound into these leather bound volumes, of which he had 4 of them. The first 2 are all like watercolor, near photographic reproductions of all of his artifacts. How much did they weigh? How big they were? Measurements and all kinds of stuff.
Wow!
And then the last 2 volumes are all the map surveys. And I tracked down all of his original papers. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to reproduce anything from his leather-bound volumes in my book. Those are in possession of the Ohio History Connection. But all of the stuff that those volumes are based on, his original papers, are at the University of Georgia. And the University of Georgia allowed me to reproduce all of it.
Wow.
And so all of that material is in my volumes. Never been published before, never been cited before. I shouldn't say that. It has been cited by one other person who reproduced one illustration from McBride's stuff at the University of Georgia. In a book called Relic Hunters, which came out about 5 years ago. But nevertheless, McBride's stuff was really illuminating. What I tended to find was that McBride loaned Squire all of it, all of his papers, the leather-bound volumes, all of his notes and field notes and sketch drawings, everything. He loaned it all to Squire. Squire took it to New York for the production of the illustrations for ancient monuments and used it all.
Right.
And he copied it all. And the descriptions that are in ancient monuments of these sites that McBride surveyed are sort of watered down, slimmed down versions of what McBride himself had written. So Squire sort of plagiarized much of McBride's work and so I have all of those transcribed, descriptions that accompany, McBride's stuff in my book.
Very cool.
So that you can compare and contrast the differences. The second guy on that upper level there, Colonel Charles Whittlesley, he provided about 19 to 20% of all of the surveys in ancient monuments. He did almost the entirety of all that work for the Ohio Geological Survey of 1837 and 1838. 1837, 1838 was just before the economic collapse in the country from Jackson's policies. And when the economic collapse happened, that ended the Ohio Geological Survey. And so, but prior to that, he and several other people, including the other top 2 guys in that row, Samuel Hildreth and Dr. John Locke, those 3 guys and a couple other guys were part of the Ohio Geological Survey. And they were tasked with, surveying the geology across the state. The only other state that had done it up to that point was New York. And when New York's was complete, they hired the guy who was in charge of what what New York had done to be the head of for Ohio.
Okay.
And they hired Whittlesey, and they got Hildreth and Locke to work on it. And they not just did the geology, but anytime they encountered earthworks, they also surveyed the earthworks. And so Whittlesey was in charge of sort of the south central part of the state, so from Portsmouth up through probably like Circleville. That's what he was responsible for. A lot of earthworks there. He did a lot of earthwork surveys.
I was about to say, he looks like a character out of Jumanji.
Yeah, and
He is intense.
he was friends with Davis.
Okay.
When Whittlesey went to survey the Newark earthworks, Davis, fresh out of school up in that area, helped Whittlesey do the survey of the Newark earthworks in like 1837, 1838. And so they were friends from that far back. And so they asked if Whittlesey, would lend them the unpublished material, because the Ohio Geological Survey had published 2 annual reports, 37 and 38.
Okay.
And then the project ended.
Right.
Wow.
Well, Whittlesey in the volume said they had collected about 60 different earthwork surveys. They'd only published 1. And so the other bunch of
59,
them, Whittlesey was sitting on. And Whittlesey had designs of writing his own book about the earthworks. And there was an author in Columbus that he was going to work with to do that. And he had sent this guy like copies of all these surveys, and they got lost in the mail. So you wonder if those will ever turn up anywhere someday.
Wouldn't that be
Wow.
amazing?
But the author that he was working with got very ill, and the project got sidelined. And so Whittlesey agreed to lend him this work that he had done for Davis and Squire. And so that wound up all of it being used, and not all of it being credited to Whittlesey either, which is interesting. Hildreth was in Marietta, Ohio, and so he worked in Marietta, and he also contributed a survey of the Plains Mounds in Athens.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. John Locke did the very first survey of Fort Hill, and he did a survey of Fort Ancient, which I can talk about later, which Squire basically used both of those and didn't give Locke any attribution for the Fort Hill one, but did for Fort Ancient. And the Fort Ancient one may not be entirely based on Locke's survey, which I can get to. Then we have Constantine Rafinesque down there in the lower left corner. He had died in like 1839 or 1840, I think it was. What is
Died?
that? Yeah, he had
1863. On his?
that must be a typo. It's early.
He died earlier than that?
He died in like 1840.
Oh, okay.
And when he died, a lot of his papers, at least his anthropological and archaeological papers, were obtained by a friend of his by the name of Brantz Mayer, who was kind of the founder of the Maryland Historical Society in Baltimore.
Alrighty.
And because Squire had, some ties with Baltimore because he had spoken there,
Right.
in his labor days.
Yeah.
He was kind of friends with Brantz Mayer, and so he asked if he could borrow Rafinesque's papers. And so Mayer agreed, and almost everything that Rafinesque did in terms of surveys of earthworks, mostly from Kentucky, wound up in Ancient Monuments. Some of it credited, some of it not credited. Then you have General William Lytle there, who was a very early surveyor in Ohio. He surveyed in the town is named after him of Williamsburg in Clermont County.
Yeah.
That's William Lytle. It was originally called Lytlestown, then it became Williamsburg. right? And so there was an earthwork about 5 miles north of there called the East Fork Works, which he had done a survey of, and he also did a survey of the Milford Works. Those appear in ancient monuments through a really convoluted story. I don't know if you guys want to get into that, but basically Squire got his surveys from a publication in France that published his surveys, and Squire basically gave that French publication right to the lithographers. They copied it straight over, essentially.
Jeez, Squire, I'll tell you what, he is a real flim-flam man, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. Well, Captain Francis Cleveland,
P.T.
the next
Barnum
guy in the
over here.
list, he was from.
Am I wrong?
What's that?
I said P.T. Barnum over
P.T.
here.
Oh, yeah.
Barnum.
You know,
It's a circus of just wildness.
You got Francis Cleveland, who was from Portsmouth.
yeah.
He was the civil engineer on the Ohio to Erie Canal, which ran from Portsmouth all the way to Cleveland. And he was in charge of the section from Chillicothe to Portsmouth. And he did the first survey of the earthworks in Portsmouth, including the Horseshoe Mound, which still exists today. And he published a map in like 1830, which I found amongst Squire's papers, as well as the drafts of those maps done by Francis Cleveland and maybe an assistant by the name of Increase Lapham. Increase Lapham was supposed to have been a member of the Ohio Geological Survey. He worked for Francis Cleveland as an assistant on the canal. They put the canal within like 100 or 200 yards of the Tremper Mound earthworks. When they dug the canal there, they found bushels and bushels of mica and all kinds of artifacts and stuff. They dug through that. And so he knew about all the earthworks around there. But by the 1840s, he owned the newspaper in Portsmouth. So he was a newspaper guy. Squire went down there and visited with him and another guy by the name of Dr. Giles Hempstead. Hempstead was also a big mound aficionado, had created a huge map of the Portsmouth earthworks. Squire collected all that information, then drew his own map of the Portsmouth earthworks, and never credited either Hempstead or Cleveland or Lapham. Lapham may have actually drafted the map of the Portsmouth earthworks for Cleveland, based on Cleveland's survey notes. And then the last guy on that list, Caleb Atwater. He published a short volume of the Ohio earthworks in 1820, so more than a quarter century before Squire and Davis, even started working on the earthworks. He had already published this volume that had about 10 earthworks in it. Squire used 9 of the 10, same sites.
At least he left one cookie.
But what was interesting was that in the entire book, Caleb Atwater's name is not mentioned at all. And I think that may be due to the fact that Caleb Atwater was a Jacksonian Democrat and was actually named as an Indian commissioner by President Andrew Jackson. Went up to Wisconsin and negotiated with some of the tribes there in the like around 1830-ish time frame.
Too wild.
So
Jackson was notorious for hating indigenous, and
yeah.
he was notorious.
Yeah. So Atwater was based in Circleville, and his map of the Circleville earthworks was considered to be the most authentic one or elaborate one, and was actually directly copied by Squire's, woodcutting team, but they don't credit him. You can overlay, Atwater's over the ancient monuments version or vice versa, and they're identical.
Yeah.
But he doesn't credit him. He talks around him. It's really weird. So that's kind of a strange thing. But and anyway, I have in the introductory chapter, at the end of the introductory chapter, I have little mini biographies of not just these 8 guys, but about 25 other guys who contributed stuff to ancient monuments, just to talk about all the different contributors, who they were, right? All of this material that Squire had gotten from all these other people. So these are just like the top 7 or 8, you know.
Caleb Atwater I've heard of.
Yeah.
I think I've come across Google Books, I think, is available of that little, the 10
Right.
Earthworks. I think I've come across that.
Just to give you a sense of what lithographs look like. So on the left is the engraved stone.
Yep.
On the right is the print in mirror reverse.
Yep.
This is one that I found of I think that's Munich, Germany.
So for our listeners, let's try to describe that.
Oh,
The stone?
Yeah, I know it's. I know it might be difficult.
It's kind of a bird's eye view or an overhead view of the map
just
of the city.
Looking at
Oh.
And so you have a kind of a map of the cityscape of in Germany there, and it's kind of a yellowish, whitish stone surface, and the ink is inset into the grooves of and that's how they create the lithograph. Litho meaning stone. That comes from the Greek lithos, and graphing meaning to write. So you're writing on stone, lithography. And so these are, I mentioned the lithographers, Napoleon Cerrone. Now, Cerrone was a character.
Looks like
As
Ben
you can tell
Kingsley.
from his dress, he's wearing this fez with this sort of military costume. He was about 4'9" or 10.
Stop.
And and he and his wife would walk around New York City dressed in these elaborate costumes. And there was a reporter that stopped them one time and asked him, why he dressed the way he did. And he goes, everyone knows who I am. It's free advertising.
Wow.
So everybody knew who he was. Now, as I mentioned, he and his partner there, Henry Major, they got their start at Courier Knives. Napoleon Cerrone went on to become very, very consequential in terms of the law in this country.
Really?
There was a case that he brought. He gave up doing lithography. He saw the handwriting on the wall. That was not going to be a profitable business very much longer after photography began. Mm-hmm. And so in the 1850s, he went over to Europe to learn how to do photography. And he came back after learning photography and set up a photographic studio. And he began to become very famous for photographing all the most famous people in the United States. So all the politicians, all of the famous actors and actresses. P.T. Barnum was a friend of his, mentioned it. Many of P.T. Barnum's promotional photos were done by Napoleon Cerrone.
Really?
Wow.
And
old PT.
Yeah. Now,
I mean, they look like they get along.
One of the subjects that became very famous because of Napoleon Cerrone was the author Oscar Wilde.
Sure, the playwright.
The playwright. And the image of Oscar Wilde as this sort of bohemian person was due to Napoleon Cerrone's dressing of the set to frame those photos. And he created sort of the image of Oscar Wilde. And those photos became really famous, and Oscar Wilde became one of the most famous people at that period of time. And there was a lithographic company in New York who took one of Cerrone's photographs of Oscar Wilde, and they created a lithographic print from that. And they ran off a couple 100,000 copies, sold a couple 100,000 copies, and Cerrone sued them for copyright infringement. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. So there's a case involving Cerrone at the Supreme Court level, and that's where the Supreme Court ruled that photography is covered under copyright. Because the photographer chooses how to frame the subject, chooses how the set is dressed, chooses the way that the lighting conditions are. The photographer is a part of the artistic process.
100%.
The lithography company said, no, it's just a mechanical operation. You just click the shutter, you have your photo. And the Supreme Court said, no. And so because of Napoleon Cerrone, we have copyright protection on photography in the United States.
There you go,
Shut
folks.
up. That might be one of the strangest things to occur for this
Photographers, I
entire
didn't even know
episode.
that.
That's too bizarre. I might have
so
to give him
cool.
some kudos, some credit, because
We salute you, Cerrone.
I take it back, Napoleon. Although you and Bonaparte are both rocking the short man syndrome.
Yeah, no doubt.
Sorry, I had to put it out there.
Quite a character. But
agree.
nevertheless, Cerrone and Major did the lithographs for ancient
He's been at it,
monuments.
putting the work in.
Now, the woodcutters, these two guys, I'm not sure I could tell them apart if I saw them on the street.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You have,
They look like Amish.
you have Orr and Richardson there. Orr is on the left, Richardson's on the right. What I have on the next slide is actually I tracked down Nathaniel Orr's actual business card engraving or business illustration engraving. So you can see he had the mirror
cool.
image of it on the left
Super rad.
and the print on the right. So Nathaniel Orr there, that was his wood engraving firm logo.
Wow.
So they were responsible for the woodcut illustrations in the book. So I talked about this already. Oh, one of the things I tracked down, you see those brown little booklets there, notebooks there.
Yeah.
I actually tracked down Squire's original field notes from where he did the surveys. I was surprised that these existed, to be honest. And they were not in the Squire collection at the Library of Congress. You would think that they would have been amongst those papers, but they weren't. They are in the collection of the Western Reserve Historical Society in Cleveland. And so I was able to access those as well as all of Charles Whittlesey's papers because Whittlesey was from Cleveland. And so I was able to get a lot of Whittlesey's original survey drawings from the Ohio Geological Survey, and those are in the book, or many of them are in the book, I should say. So in any event, I was able to track down the original drawings of Serpent Mound that Squire made when he visited Serpent Mound, which are the earliest drawings that we now have, you know. So in any event, those were kind of fun to see too. So lots of sources, lots of other methods, that I was able to track down stuff. It was a huge detective project. I ended up getting material from about 14 or 15 different institutions around the United States. All of them incredibly helpful, with the exception of one, which I mentioned.
Yeah.
So I credit all of them and acknowledge all of them in the beginning of the book. To give you an example of the differences that you can see in the book between the published material and the originals. This is plate number 1. This is a lithograph in the book. And this is called A View of the Ancient Works at Marietta, Ohio. And so for the listeners, the picture is you're standing on top of a ridge overlooking a valley of where there's a whole bunch of earthworks laid out on this plain. And you can see in the foreground, there's these 2 trees that kind of crisscross each other, and there's like a couple of Indians standing there, and then there's like a cabin and some other stuff. And so this, in ancient monuments, is acknowledged as being based on a painting by an artist by the name of Charles Sullivan. And the painting was commissioned by a person by the name of Anselm Nye. And I had seen a version of Charles Sullivan's painting once. There is a version of that painting at the Campus Martius Museum in Marietta, Ohio. And it was like on an easel in the museum, and you could literally walk right up to it. And I took high-resolution pictures of it at the time this is like years ago, not knowing that I would come back to this, right?
Isn't that crazy?
And so I had high resolution pictures of this painting. And so I was familiar with the painting.
I'll bet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I could use that in the book, right? Yeah. Well, the Ohio History Connection owns that museum. And so they wanted to charge me $150 at a minimum to run my own photograph of the painting in my book. So I did not include that photograph. But it wasn't essential anyways. I'm going to show you that picture here in a second.
Okay.
But when there's another lithograph in the book, which is also based on a Charles Sullivan painting. Okay. So there's one mound, which is in between the two trees in the distance there. Yeah. It's called the Conus Mound. It's the big, tall, conical mound in the picture. Hard to see in this view.
I think I see. Okay, I got you.
That
it's shaded on half of it.
He created kind of a singular full-page ground level view of that mound. And that became a lithograph in the book, and same commissioned by Anselm Nye. Well, I'd never seen that painting anywhere. I'd never seen a reference to that painting anywhere, and so I went on a hunt for that painting. And I couldn't find hardly any references to Charles Sullivan paintings out there. Very few institutions hold Charles Sullivan paintings, but one of the places that had a mention that they had a Charles Sullivan painting was Marietta College. So I reached out to Marietta College and I asked them if they had this Conus Mound painting, and they said no, they don't have that painting. And I said, well, do you have any Charles Sullivan paintings of any of the mounds in Marietta? And they said, yes, we do. We have one. It's up in one of our reading rooms on the wall. And I said, well, it's like a 3-hour drive for me to get there. Can you, take a cell phone picture and send it to me? Which they did, courteous enough to do that. And it turned out to be this painting. I said, wait, I thought that painting was on display at Campus Martians Museum. And they said, well, that's a copy. We have the original.
What?
And so you told OHC thanks, but no thanks?
Well, yeah, I didn't need them. I didn't need their painting because I went to Marietta College and they let me photograph the painting and allowed me to use it for free. Right. So, I have the original in the book as opposed to the copy that OHC made. And they said, actually, there were Anselm Nye, when he commissioned his painting, it became very popular within his family, and so they made 2 other copies. And so there's actually a 3rd copy out there, which I now understand has also been acquired by the Ohio History Connection and is at the Campus Martians Museum. So if you want to see the 2 copies, they're at the Campus Martians Museum.
There you go.
But if you want to see the original, it's hanging in the library at Marietta College.
Cat's out of the bag.
Right.
That's so cool.
Now, this is a bit of one of those sort of eye tests that what are the differences between these 2 pictures? So here's our original here, and here is the original painting.
Oh, boy. Wow. So there's no conical mound in the center of the 2 trees.
No, there is.
But it's kind of like way up in the shade, right?
It doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still there.
It's in a different spot.
The trees are a little bit different.
Trees are a little bit. Now
they're a little scrawnier.
They're crisscrossing. That's about all there is. The same. There's no Native American in the foreground.
No people in the foreground. Yeah. Those were added.
That's so weird. Why would they do that?
Is that a cabin down there?
That is a cabin.
That's strange. Why would they add them?
Yeah. So this is kind of an interest. There's differences.
Let's go back one.
Wait a minute. Okay, I'm like. You already got me messed up. Let's go back.
Let's go back one.
Damn it.
Let's go back.
Let's go.
So. I need a refresh. Oh, wow.
Wow.
And go back again. Now.
They've really taken some liberties with backing the perspective up. And going, hey, can we, Bob Ross this and put a happy little family over here?
Happy little Native American family here. And
all right. So there's some differences. There's clearly some differences.
You could say that.
Well, that's part of the reason why I did this book, was so that you could see the differences between the original source material and what ended up in this final printed edition.
Now, I know we'll probably cover it,
Let's-
but are there a lot more examples of just like stark differences like this,
Sure.
or is this like more extreme?
Yeah, obviously this is more extreme because of the color.
Yeah.
For one.
What about the question of artistic prowess at the time of whoever's going out and doing the
ourselves in their
original,
shoes.
and then I mean,
climate?
obviously, art's been around for a long time, and painters and they
People
do a
have been
good job.
copying-
I'm just saying, are
People
they?
have been copying other
Again,
people's art.
Is it
you have
bad
to- you have to
copies?
think.
Yeah, is it?
Squire took a copy of this painting to New York City and they put it down, and then the artist has to then recreate that in mirror image.
I'm just.
And you're going from color to black and white. In fact, actually, I should go back to this original painting here for a second. So this original lithograph, I don't know if you noticed that there's a couple of different shades of color there.
Yeah.
So there are two of these in ancient monuments in the original edition that were produced with a process called chromolithography. Chromolithography had been invented in Germany about 2 years prior to this, and these illustrations in ancient monuments are the first known published illustrations of chromolithographs in the United States.
Wow.
So what that means is they ran the printing process twice using two different colors, essentially. So you have kind of a two-tone version
I
here.
see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
So that's how
And-
you're getting that dynamic range, if you
That's
will, in
right.
film terms of like, see the sky
Yep.
and how it gradients up.
And I
That's
think
the
that was
chroma.
done for just the two Charles Sullivan paintings. They used the chromolithograph process to capture that additional detail. All the rest of the lithographs are done through the normal lithographic print process.
Interesting.
So I know that's really technical jargon.
I love it. 'Cause I know what you're talking
No,
about.
but it's super interesting because, right, if you use just one color, you're going to get a flat effect.
Right.
Yep.
So if I go back to that. So here's now here I'll show you the copy at the Campus Martians Museum so you can see the difference.
Oh wow, it looks a little ill.
It's a little more yellowed.
It's a little. It looks like it has jaundice.
Right. Now, this isn't the only versions of these paintings that have happened.
I couldn't do
I'm
it,
going to show you one more here, which is, again, this is the one that was in Ancient Monuments. This is the lithograph. And then there's this painting.
What the hell? More Native Americans added.
The trees are on separate hills now. Like,
Okay,
there's
well,
a teepee in the corner.
The perspective of the earthwork, the complex, is much closer.
It's a little different, isn't it?
It's much closer,
Right.
and it's not through the tree. It's like perfectly on the right.
Okay, so this painting has a fascinating story unto itself.
Confused, yeah.
I don't know if you can tell across the very top of the painting, there are these little metal pieces. Do you see that? Can you see? Oh, it kind of sags at one end.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a canvas that is about 20 feet wide by 12 feet high.
That's how big this is?
Yeah, and this
Holy cow.
This was one panel in a collection of panels of the same size, 20 feet wide by 12 feet high, painted on canvas for a public presentation that was given by a medical doctor by the name of Montroval W. Dixon in 1850. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
Just knowing that that's what's happening, the production of these,
Yeah.
again, I just have to wonder, is somebody just like, I'm going to get close to how it accurately looks, because we're going from
Right.
how high of a fidelity rate are we looking for on a reproduction of painting this out to then give the.
So this was part of a short-lived sort of trend in the United States in the late 1840s and into the 1850s of there's no television, there's no
Sure,
radio,
totally
there's none of
get
this
it.
stuff.
Absolutely.
And so people would buy tickets to go to public presentations.
This is a movie.
And this guy would give a lecture about the earthworks as these scrolled across the stage behind him.
PowerPoint slide.
So we're just
PowerPoint
time
slides.
traveling
Yes.
here.
Yeah, that's right.
We're just time traveling.
I love
right.
this.
And so this
We're
guy,
doing it now with Jeff.
This guy, Montroval Dixon, was a medical doctor, left Philadelphia in the 1830s on an 8-year trip down the Ohio and Mississippi River.
8 freaking years.
What do you think your wife might say to, hey, honey, I'll be back in 8 years?
Yeah, go. Yeah, I'm probably
And
gonna go
along the
bone
way,
down.
It's your turn to watch the dog,
he would
honey.
stop in different places and at mound sites, and he would sketch them out, many times excavate at them and went at those sites. And then when he returned, he kind of became a bit of a sensation. And
I would say so.
at the same time that Squire had gone to the East Coast, and
Okay.
people were talking about them in the same circles. And in fact, the American Ethnological Society said, you got to meet this Montroval Dixon guy. He's really got a lot of stuff. He's doing what you guys are doing, but he's gone, all the way down the Ohio and into the Mississippi. And so they arranged for Dixon to go to Chillicothe, and he met with Davis.
Okay.
Did not meet with Squire. Squire at the time had gotten into a bit of a political dispute amongst his Whig buddies in Chillicothe, which almost resulted in some kind of fist fight. He was allegedly, the story goes, there were black codes in Ohio at the time. Black people could not do certain things. One of them was there were a lot of restrictions about what they could do in engaging in the justice system. They couldn't serve on juries. They couldn't testify in cases. So there was a lot of stuff like that.
Sure.
And Squire was opposed to the black codes and got into a fight with another Whig guy who was for the codes. And so Squire had to kind of leave town. And he arranged to become the clerk of the Ohio House of Representatives for their session at the beginning of 1847.
Nice.
So he left and came to Columbus, and he was out of town when Dixon showed up to meet with Davis. Now, Dixon met with Davis, and then he went to Circleville and met with Caleb Atwater. And in fact, I have in my book Dixon's original drawing of the Circleville Earthworks, which is probably the most detailed one that's ever been done, probably from the material that he got from Caleb Atwater when he met with him when he came to town. Well, I believe that Dixon got this information off of one of the copied paintings that Squire and Davis had in their possession that they were about ready to publish the book about. And so this wound up being the first panel in Dixon's gigantic presentation. Now, you got to think about this. They had these on gigantic rollers wound up, and then they would scroll it across the stage behind him as he talked about it. And then he displayed artifacts from these sites, and they gave these presentations in Philadelphia and New York City. And this eventually wound up at the University of Pennsylvania, who by the turn of the century didn't want it anymore, and they were going to throw it away. And that was about the time that the St. Louis World's Fair was going to be organized.
Oh, boy.
And so they shipped it out there to St. Louis World's Fair, and at the end of the fair, it wound up in the possession of the St. Louis Art Museum. And about 15 years ago, they started to restore this entire gigantic panel. It's like something like 240,000 square feet of canvas.
That's crazy.
You can go to the St. Louis Museum of Arts now, and every month they have one panel on display, and you can go there and see that panel. But they were kind enough to allow me to reproduce the panels that were related to Ohio Earthworks for the book, and this is for for
so
the plate
this
number
is a
one.
photograph.
This is a photograph that they took
big giant panel
of the panel. This is actually of the canvas restored.
Wow,
that's insane to think how big that is. That
I
it's
know.
like literally life size.
It's incredible. So he has one of like the Portsmouth Earthworks. He has one of the Circleville Earthworks.
I'm just imagining seeing this as a show.
Well,
yeah.
Being in a
what it
lit
reminds me of?
room and what?
Point Pleasant, West Virginia. You ever been down that really nice walkway there on the river? In Point Pleasant, they have a whole quarter-mile stretch, half-mile stretch.
Yeah. We just
of
went
these
there. Yeah.
mural, beautiful,
You walk
huge
past them the
murals.
whole way.
Portsmouth has that. They have one of the panels of the
it's right
Portsmouth
on the water.
Earthworks is of the Earthworks.
Yep, it's right on the
So
Ohio
rad.
River.
But
there.
that's what this reminds me of.
Yeah.
Yeah, now that you say
It's the
that.
same kind of style.
Yeah, the Indians here have dress of like the Caddo Indians in Texas. It makes no sense.
Yeah, what-
there's a
what's
lot
up
of
with
stuff, but I do have one other story that I want to tell about this lithograph here, and actually the painting itself. If we went back to the
OG.
original painting,
The original is
This
that one.
So I don't know if you can see this in the detail because we're sitting so far away from it, but kind of around the middle of the earthworks, there's a line of people
Yeah.
that are walking. Okay. Anselm Nye, who commissioned the painting, who was one of the first trustees and organizers of Marietta College, who this painting was donated to. His father was one of the first settlers in Marietta. And so Anselm Nye got his father to work with Charles Sullivan to create this painting as authentically as possible to its original view. And included in that authenticity was the procession of people. And that referred to a very specific historical incident that took place in which some of the local Indians had stolen some of the horses from the settlers there. One of the buildings that you can see kind of on the left center side of the painting is actually the Campus Martius building, which was the first land office in Ohio, from the Ohio Company.
Now, wasn't Marietta the first founded city in Ohio?
Correct.
So it's the oldest city we have in Ohio, guys.
Right. And so there was some of the local tribes stole some of the horses, and they sent out a contingent of soldiers from Fort Harmer, which is right across on the other side of the mouth of the river there. That's the Ohio River running linear, and the Muskegum running into us. That's the mouth of the Muskegum River there. And so the Marietta Earthworks are on one side of the mouth of the river, north side. On the south side, Fort Harmer was over there. And so they sent out some soldiers from Fort Harmer to go get the horses back. And that is a procession of soldiers returning to the fort. This is based on a description from Anselm Nye's younger brother, who was 5 years old when this incident took place and was an eyewitness to it, that the soldiers returned with the head of one of the Indians on a pike. And that's in the painting. So that's kind of an unusual story. And so that's part of why this painting was, kind of famous for its time, was that historical depiction of an actual event that took place.
Wow.
So
wow. You're blowing my mind. That holy. That gives that picture a lot more depth.
Right. Right. So that's just plate number one, right? Okay.
How many did you have?
Well, there are 48 plates in the book and about 200 illustrations.
Jesus. Jeff, you went so deep, man. This
is plate number 2. Okay. What you see here on the left here is kind of an overview of the earthworks around the city of Chillicothe, Ohio, as it looked in 1847-ish.
Okay.
Let me show you a few examples of the draft illustrations. So this is a draft illustration on the right that Squire made. So the lithographer is working off of the draft. All right, and you can see there are some differences, quite a bit of differences between those two. I won't go into all those details because they're so minute on this particular panel. But what's interesting about this is how many versions of this draft Squire went through to come to the final version, right? So here, we'll show another one here. So this is another version of that. So you can look at the sequence. I'm kind of going in reverse sequence. What I think is the last version, this is probably the one prior to that. Then there's another one prior to that. you can see some of the differences change as they're looking at earthworks. The earthworks are changing as they refine their surveys. And by the way, this map is not to scale whatsoever. People have said that this is a really accurate map. Not even close.
Yeah.
The earthworks up at the top versus the earthworks at the bottom are like, if you tried to overlay this map in Google, like Google Earth Maps or something like that, it would be way off. Those ones at the top are like 5 to 8 miles off the top of the map, and the ones at the bottom are 5 to 8 miles off the bottom of the map. I mean, it's just not even close. Squire was not good. In fact, this is one of the several maps in the book that when you look at the key up in the upper right of the map, it doesn't say that it was surveyed by. All the rest of the maps say surveyed by X, whether it's Squire and Davis or whoever. They say surveyed by, but this map does not say that. It said it was constructed by. There are a couple of maps that say constructed by.
Devil's in the details.
And so Squire sort of invented this map.
Right.
It didn't exist. They didn't survey this out.
Frankenstein map.
Yeah, and so it's not really that accurate. But it does contain records of all these different earthworks, which don't really exist. A lot of them are destroyed, right? Now, I found quite a number of those. Now, I mentioned Squire's Aboriginal monuments in the Mississippi Valley.
Yeah.
This is his version from Aboriginal monuments with the crease down the middle because the map was originally folded in the book. That was also done by Cerrone and Major. So Cerrone and Major also did the lithographs that appeared in Aboriginal monuments. And guess what? They're not the same. They're actually different.
I was just about to say, if he's the same person doing them. He did,
same
two
people
different
doing
qualities.
it based on the same drawings, different outcomes. And so you can see these in the book. You can look at them side by side, whatever, and you can look at those differences.
Do you think they were all just kind of looking at each other's, surveys and going, "Wow, I'm going to look like maybe."
Yeah.
He was looking at someone else's as like. Maybe
Right.
Squire wasn't the only one doing it. Maybe they are all.
Well, that's
kind of
definitely the
doing
case
it.
because at the American Antiquarian Society, I found a couple of versions done by Davis of this same map, and they're a little bit different, but essentially the same overview.
Too many
look,
cooks,
right?
We got too many cooks. Just get one person surveying.
So
this.
those Davis versions are also in my book. I don't think I included them
Man,
here.
oh
but-
man,
Dude, the thing is a lot of these guys, like you showed earlier, they're all like colonels and former military and militia people.
Right.
They're all wild dudes.
Well, probably a lot
running around,
probably a lot of-
opening up mounds.
a lot of Alpha Davy Crockett machismo going on. Maybe.
Oh, 100%.
So you mentioned the opening mounds issue. I talk about this in the book. What Squire and Davis did in this whole thing of going around and excavating the mounds and retrieving artifacts and stuff, people today would say that they were looters.
Yeah.
Well, people would have said that also in 1848 or 45 when Squire and Davis were doing it. There were laws on the books in Ohio, which I include in the book. I put the actual law that was on the books at the time that Squire and Davis violated in terms of digging up people's graves. That was illegal at the time that they did this work.
So what got them? It was just so sensational
Wasn't
that they couldn't arrest them, or
wasn't enforced.
It wasn't enforced. People didn't.
No one cared.
Nobody cared. And but here's the
People
thing.
don't
So
live here anymore.
So here's the fun part of that law. Not only was it a violation of the law to dig up these mounds, you could be fined a substantial amount. I think it was like up to $10,000, and you could be put in prison for it. And the law was specific. You could be put in prison and served only bread and water for 30 days for violating this. On top of that, anyone with any knowledge of you doing it and that didn't report it or had contributed in any way to help you do it could also be found guilty of the same.
Accessory.
Right?
yeah.
So who does that implicate? the Smithsonian,
Oh, boy.
American Antiquarian Society, American Ethnological Society, Harvard, like a whole host of other
Of
institutions.
course. Like, I had no idea
that
this-
knew Squire and Davis were doing this work, that had that had assisted them financially in doing this work, that received the material of them doing this work. They would all been guilty of this crime, and
They were all digging up mounds later too.
exactly.
And breaking
These laws existed into the
I didn't know
into
that.
the late 1800s.
I did not know that.
And so, it was the same thing when, Frederick Putnam at Harvard
And Serpent Mound.
and Serpent Mound. That exact same thing would have applied at the same time.
Whoa! They were Harvard was sending out.
Didn't matter if it was on public property or private property. The law said.
Okay, let's pause this again now. So we got
Yeah.
the Smithsonian who already stumbles in the starting blocks and then hits the first hurdle and they
Right.
fall again.
So
And
they violate Ohio law in supporting Squire and Davis's mound looting expeditions.
right, but even beyond that,
And that's
of like,
what it is too.
Yeah.
Let's not get it sideways.
of like saying, hey, you don't have to give all the credit to all the lithographers that were doing the wood carvings, but you got to give this guy some credit. And but
Right.
even it just seems so very not what has been present. It's just such a hard thing to wrap
right.
your head around what's been presented as this is how it's come about. And
Yeah.
it's like, I don't see that here.
'Cause I know this is really hard to see on the screen, but all the little dots in red are the mounds from the prior map.
Sure.
Spread out over a
Showing how
much
far
bigger
out they
area.
are. Yeah.
And I don't know if I put the whoops. Let me go forward here.
Try to overlay them.
Yeah, there's your overlay.
Oh, that's comical.
What?
So they drew the rivers and everything.
So you
in
see
the-
the red dots that go kind of south
Yep.
towards the right corner.
Mm-hmm.
Those are on Squire's map, but they're way off the map. So
They were
they're-
trying to condense it all into it.
condense it down.
That's too funny.
I just did that to talk about a different story. So on that original map, that full map of the Circleville Earthworks, in the city of Circleville itself, there are a couple of earthworks that Squire has drawn on his map, and Squire and Davis have on both their maps. And a friend of mine, Gary Argabright from
Gary, shout out Gary.
Ross County Historical Society and the Mound City chapter of the Archaeological Association of Ohio Archaeological Society. He was working on a project to track down where all the mounds were in the city of Chillicothe, which are now all gone. And he had seen one of my public presentations of this map, and he said, hey, do you have any information that might be able to track down where the specific mound grouping is in there? So I had these maps, I overlaid it, and I did this map here. And you can't, kind of in the center of the map, there are 4 red circles there. That was the mound group that Gary was concerned about and trying to look for. And then I found a map, which we can talk about, of what archaeologists had called the East Fork works. That's that square and the big circles.
It looks a lot like Sipe.
And then there's
Oakton
another
and-
mound grouping across the river up in the hills up there. That's another group up there. And so I, was working on this for Gary, and I noticed something that kind of stuck out at me. I didn't include this in the book, but I figured I'd bring it to tell you guys about it. So let's zoom in on that a little bit. So here's our area where you've got the 4 circles to the left, and you've got what they called the East works, kind of in the lower right center. And then this is what caught my attention, was you see that one field just to the right of the 4 circles? Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's zoom
There's
in.
something there.
Yeah, let's zoom in on that.
There's totally something there.
I don't know if you can see that on this screen, but there's a giant circle there. And that
Wow.
is one of the earthworks that Squire put on his map.
Wow.
And I was astonished to see this from the Google satellite photography here in Google Earth Pro. That circle has some semblance of existence left remaining in the one last undeveloped property in the city of Chillicothe.
That's literally it.
It's there. And so I reported on this at my presentation to the Ross County Historical Society, and I, encouraged the locals to contact the city leaders to, see about maybe preserving that last remaining earthwork circle that still has some trace of existence there. So I can kind of, I think I put a red circle there. There it is.
Yes, I did make it out.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did make it out without it. So thanks for pulling that up then.
Yeah.
And I just want to mention, maybe go back a little bit when you were talking about Circleville. And guys, literally, there was a giant circle earthwork before the city of Circleville. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. In the book, the very earliest mound illustration that people know about in Ohio is of the Circleville Earthworks, which I include in my book, which is from, ready for the date? 1773.
Whoa.
Now, Ohio became a state in 1803,
Yes.
and the Treaty of Greenville, which basically kicked the Indians out of southern Ohio, north of the Treaty
Fort
of Greenville
Recovery,
line.
that's where we're from.
Fort Recovery.
Yep.
That happened in 1795, right?
Yep.
So this is, before the Revolutionary War, there was an English trader that had gone through the area and had drawn that out, and that got sent back with a British missionary essentially, and was published in a newspaper in Boston in 1773.
That's amazing.
Of the Circleville Earthworks, and it wasn't until the 1800s that people started settling within the walls of the circle of the earthwork. And
That's how big it was.
that's why they named it Circleville, was for the circular earthwork.
I didn't know this either.
Okay, now
For a long time.
it was in the 1830s that, decades after the village had been there, they had essentially put the city hall right in the center of the circle, and then radiating out from the center of it, out in all directions, were the streets of the town.
Yeah.
Well, evidently, people got tired of that.
Yeah.
And they wanted to have a normal gridded city.
Yeah.
And so they formed a corporation, and very slowly, quarter by quarter, went through the entire village and demolished everything and gridded out the city into a square. And that's why the earthwork is now obliterated.
It's gone.
Because they actually got a corporation to obliterate it.
Because somebody
on
needed
purpose.
to have, 90-degree angles to get to Starbucks inside their Native American earth,
Yep. And so
Maybe this
even though
has
the
something
name
to
is
do
still
with
there,
why we're spiritually lost in so many ways in our culture. Like, just let's obliterate. And imagine you got a town inside of an earthwork. That's amazing that they actually built their town and spindled it out, I guess you could say.
if you go
center.
to England, have you ever been to England?
Yeah.
Did you go to Avebury?
So we were in a couple towns outside of Stonehenge. I don't think it was Avebury.
So Avebury, the village of Avebury, is within
Yes.
the circle.
Yes.
And that circle at Avebury is roughly comparable to the size of the circle at Circleville.
Yeah, we definitely did. But yes, that is.
And so, that little village never really developed and expanded. So there's just a little, few buildings in the middle of it. But, they don't go wild with their development out there.
No.
So the Avebury earthwork is still intact.
Avebury's super famous.
I actually talk about
Really
Avebury in my
strange.
book a little bit
a lot of-
because it has to do with Portsmouth Earthworks map that Squire made, but that's just another story. So, in any event, you can see I've put up there 3 of Squire's drafts, and in the area where that bend of the river goes up and then makes like a 90-degree turn to come down, and it shows that sort of half circular earthwork. Mm-hmm. That's the earthwork that we're looking at in this last remaining undeveloped section.
Wow.
I see what you're saying.
Now, the reason that it's undeveloped is that property is owned by a gravel mining company, which you can see on the far right. They are mining that whole thing away, and eventually they're going to get to the other side and mine that away unless somebody steps in and does something about it.
What's that gravel from geologically?
It's just limestone gravel
pit
from the river. This is right along the river.
I was going to say, is the river just
right to the top up there?
It's right there.
Yeah, it's right up there.
That's water.
Right up at the top left. That's the Scioto River.
That's water.
Yeah, I see it.
All right. So I just thought that, you could kind of see that particular earthwork.
That's too wild.
And I just happened to stumble upon that through this work that, Gary said, "Hey, can you help me out? I know you've done, got this stuff." So when I started to apply these draft maps to looking at Google satellite shots, I rediscovered that earthwork there. So.
That's so
very cool.
All right, so here's another panel of 4 different earthworks. This is another plate in Ancient Monuments. We have. I didn't want to pull that up for a second. So up in the upper left, that is the Baum Earthworks. That is in private hands. Then the upper right is the East Works, which is the one I just mentioned. Then on the lower left is the Sipe Mound Earthworks. That is part of the National Park Service's Hopewell Culture National Park. It's one of the units. And the fourth one in the lower right is the Frankfurt Earthworks, of which almost nothing exists of that, except for largely one large mound preserved by the Archaeological Conservancy. But the geometric earthworks part of it is pretty much overlaid by the village of Frankfurt. But you'll notice that you have now, instead of just one huge map on a page, you have now 4 maps on a page. And that was due to the Smithsonian started to put pressure on Squire to control the costs of the book. When they originally allocated funding for the book, the trustees of the Smithsonian allocated $1,000 in 1847 money to make this book. And they blew through that in a hurry.
Oh, I bet.
And so Joseph Henry went back to the board and they allocated another $3,000 and they blew through that. And so the trustees were getting pretty fed up with that. In modern money, it cost more than $100,000 to produce the illustrations for this book. Huge amount of money to produce this book. And they basically, the order came down from on high. You need to start consolidating these. And so what I found amongst Squire's papers was that he had full page maps of each one of these. And then the order came down, you got to cut that down. So then he went to 2 to a page. When then the case, no, that's not good enough. Then he went to 4 to a page. So I'm going to show you some of the other illustrations. So there's 2 to a page there, so you can see the differences that he has there for the 2 on the, that ended up on the right in Ancient Monuments, was a full page with 2 drawings on it. He actually has a full page of each one of those. There's that Eastworks as a full page. Now, what's important about this particular drawing is archaeologists actually never really understood exactly where this earthwork was located, because on Squire's other city map, it's wildly out of scale and it's kind of fuzzy as to where that is. The city hadn't extended that far yet, so there's no roads or anything, no marks. But this one has exact measurements. It has exact measurements to other buildings that were in the area. It has the names of the peoples who own those buildings. It shows a lot of additional details. I now can map this exactly to where this was in the city. Also, at the very bottom, Squire gave it a name, not the East Earthworks, as the archaeological community has talked about for all these years, but he called it the Station Prairie Works. Now, if you don't know your Ross County history or your Chillicothe history, you might not understand why that name is important. But the Station Prairie is named for this prairie area along the river. And when the city was founded by Nathaniel Massey, the first place that they went was on this prairie, and they built a little station there, and that became known as Prairie Station, which eventually became the city of Chillicothe. They then eventually named that prairie the Station Prairie. That's why Squire named this the Station Prairie Works, because that was still in existence when Squire and Davis were around.
Wow.
And so I call it the Station Prairie Works because Squire called it the Station Prairie Works, but they don't say anything. They don't give any name in ancient monuments of the Mississippi Valley. Later archaeologists named it the East Works because it's on the east side of Chillicothe. So now this has a name.
Prairie Station Earthworks, y'all.
Prairie Station.
Love it. That's
So
way cooler.
That's just, one of those little historical details that you find that
Jeff,
I think
how
is
do
kind
you
of
just?
important.
Oh my gosh, man!
So I want to show this
like-
one really specific. So
That's the plains, right?
the plains is the one that's in the center. The one that is on the left is the one that I want to talk about. So that's called the Dunlap Works. And if you know of the Mound City Earthworks in Chillicothe, this is north of that.
Okay.
Okay. And it was the northernmost one on Squire's map. But I want to show you Squire's original drawing of this, his survey of it, compared to the published lithograph. You can see that the published lithograph is like a parallelogram in which the main part of the parallelogram goes from the upper left towards the lower right.
Right.
Okay. So
What the hell is going on there?
that's a serious difference.
Whoa,
That is
hold
a
on. It's
monumental serious
literally
difference.
the entire direction of this parallelogram, or I guess it looks more like a rhombus now, or something like that.
Yeah.
So
you have
pointing the opposite.
Squire's final illustration versus the lithograph. And this is what I mean about this has real world archaeological implications. Are we looking at if it's Squire's original survey is the way the earthwork is laid out versus the one that's on the left, there's all kinds of real world archaeological implications about trying to locate where this earthwork is, where those walls are located. They're wildly different. The parallelogram is now going from the lower left to the upper right instead.
Right.
And if you look at all of those full Chillicothe map surveys, all of those drafts show what is on the right, not what is published on the left. And so even on Davis's drafts, it shows how it is on the right, not how it was published on the left. So that means that the lithographers, in trying to take that and mirror image it,
Didn't do
They
a good
messed
job.
up.
they messed that
They
up.
messed up the mirror. That's what it looks like. They just
You're
went-
over budget. You're under pressure.
Well, it looks like they just didn't mirror it at all. Like it did the reverse effect once you actually lay it down to make the print.
Yeah,
So they just made the exact copy
kind of.
in a way, but it's still beyond that. It's still really, really
There are lots of
jacked
differences.
up.
There's lots of differences between these.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean about why I thought that publishing this material was so important. Was this has never
Look how
been published before?
The bottom corner
not been seen
droops
before.
way down.
Yes.
And that's interesting. Like the diamond actually is pulled way out in the bottom right corner. And then that bottom right corner on the right, which is connected to this causeway, pathway, road, I guess you could call it, is like pushed way, way up.
They're flipped.
Yeah.
It's flipped. If you took that and laid
But-
them on each
but
other, the
even
diamonds
so,
would match up. The
look
roads
how-
would match up, but the diamonds would.
but not really.
It wouldn't really be the same.
It would be close.
Well, just maybe the diamond part, but all the rest of it, they think they got it generally right.
Yeah,
but it's significantly different, and so this is what I mean. Why this material?
Well,
was so
and even up
important
top
to
on the
show.
circular with the little inlet on that is
have
off.
you caused
kilter.
a freak out? Has the word gotten out about any of this?
I don't know.
I mean, as our
I've
show,
already moved on to. I'm already in the process of editing the next book that I'm publishing, which is a book about the Portsmouth earthworks written by Emily Aldrich.
Emily's great.
And so Emily has been working on her manuscript. She started during the pandemic, and she has finished up her manuscript, and we're in the process of editing that now. And so that'll be published sometime early next year.
Nice.
So I've already, I just published this and I'm on to the next project. I just got to keep going. I got so much stuff I got to work on. But so I don't really know what
we got to get you on a podcast tour, Jeff. This has to get out there.
I don't know what the archaeological community is saying much about my book at this point. I haven't gotten a lot of feedback. The feedback that I have heard from a handful of people that in the archaeological community that have started looking at the book is they said it's a great read. It is so dense, they have not been able to get through much of it at this point. And it's been out for about, 6 weeks now or 7 weeks. They said that it is just so incredibly dense worth of material that, and it's 1,300 pages. They haven't even made through volume 1 yet. They're just working their way through it.
Is part of the pitch of this version or this kind of like publishing, like feeling like a Squire and Davis, like going on the journey of like getting through the book itself? It's that dense. Like you were journeying along.
It took me about as long to write this and put this together as it took Squire and Davis to do their entire partnership. Was about 2 years, and so that's about how long it took me to put this together. Of course, their book was about 350 pages, and I added another 1,000 pages to that. So, I kind of tripled what that outcome was.
Just ever so slightly calling them slackers.
If you take all, volume 1, 2 together, and 3, all that combined is about triple the original book. So,
jeez,
has your buddy Graham Hancock seen any of this?
Well, he's been traveling. I notified him that the book was out. I don't know if he's going to take a look at it soon or not. I know that he is. He just recently reported on. He was down in the Peruvian Amazon looking at large geometric earthworks, just like these.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah.
And so he and I have had some conversation about this kind of thing in the past.
Yeah.
I have kind of some hypothesis about maybe possible connections between these two different kinds of sets of earthworks.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Very.
Yeah. I mean, I don't write about it in the book, but I have a hypothesis about that.
Something to explore further later.
Talk to another episode for sure.
Yeah. So here is an earthwork, which is on that Chillicothe map called the Cedar Bank Earthworks. This is now under threat of development. This is also one of the few remaining untouched earthworks that's in private hands. But recently, the landowner of this has announced that he is going to build a gigantic sports and entertainment complex here with some kind of sports fields and hotel business. And, this is literally immediately north of the Hopeton Earthworks, which is one of the units of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, Hopewell Culture Earthworks. And this is about ready to be destroyed. And so it'll be interesting to see if enough people are interested in preserving these earthworks. Obviously, I would advocate for it. Those major walls of that square are as intact as any of the other earthworks. In fact, those are better intact than the earthworks at the Hopeton Earthworks, which is preserved by the National Park Service, literally less than a mile to the south.
We got to help preserve these. I will. So 100%.
The Heartland Earthworks Conservancy is involved in trying to preserve these. I don't know what the effort is at this point. I haven't really heard much of an effort, grassroots, coming up because you're pressuring a private landowner at this point. The property isn't for sale. The guys are.
You got to speak to their better nature and kind of try to figure out
Could
how
you get us in contact with some people that are at least talking about organizing? I'd like to
possibly
raise the awareness.
Gary's probably really Gary Argabright.
We need to have Gary on. Mm-hmm. We have for those of you.
Why don't we help you redirect that vision from tearing it down and doing that into like building it up somehow and bringing awareness to it?
I have a map that I include in the book that was done around 1810 to 1815-ish time frame that actually shows, you see down at the bottom of this map, that circle and the little square platform mound, and there's like another little J-shaped, upside-down J-shaped earthwork. Those appear on the Hopeton earthwork map because that's how close they are. It's literally one continuous set of earthworks. The Hopeton part has been preserved, but this part hasn't. But it's really all part of the same complex. So it's really a shame that this portion of it might get developed in this day and age with all the knowledge that we have that these earthworks are there. It's just like, So if
you wanted to go see this, what would you contact the landowner, or is it right now?
I bet you
it's
they
not
wouldn't.
a park,
I would.
right?
I don't know. I wouldn't think the landowner would give you permission, but you never know. But
not unless you can really butter them up,
right?
Pay him. Give you $150.
So in any event, there is Squire's draft. Now, interestingly enough, you see that sort of long earthwork next to the square.
Yeah.
You can see that on the other one. The ends of those drawings are different. Squire shows his has a little more rounded end.
Yeah.
But in the published lithograph, they show that as a kind of a really long rectangle. And it's really not a rectangle. They have rounded ends to that earthwork. And there's a bunch of those that have been found around Ohio. And nobody really knows what those are or what they were used for or anything. They're super rare.
Are they kind of like the walls around the Newark earthwork in a way? Because you do kind of see those walls around the Great Circle, at least.
Not really. The early Ohio archaeologists called them the way that there's a famous one outside of Stonehenge called the Stonehenge cursus. And so they used to call these the cursus. Based on the same sort of archaeological style if you look at them on a map. But nobody really knows what these were for, but they're really long parallel lines that are enclosed at either end, with a kind of a circular end enclosure. Mm-hmm. There are a bunch of these that have been found around Ohio, and this is just one of those. You can notice that there's a road that goes through that. Even in Squire and Davis' time, there was a road that went through that, and that is now kind of the end of Bridge Street in Chillicothe as it merges into, it merges with 23 just about a mile to the north of this. So that's the location of that.
Why would they build these type of? It's just when I look at these old drawings, it's like, why would they build? They like the way they are. These circles, these squares. Like, what was the point?
One of the interesting features of this site is that it incorporates two pyramids. These are flat top pyramids. There's the one that's inside of the square. That's kind of a rectangular version. And then there's that one down by that circular feature down below. So these pyramidal platform mounds, you saw them in the Marietta painting. They had a couple of those in Marietta. Mm-hmm. They had those here. They had those at the Baum Earthworks.
Like
had one
style.
Yes,
like down in Georgia, but not
much lower,
big.
Not
those
much lower to the ground.
I gotcha. Okay.
So they're pyramidal shaped, flat top. Kind of
like maybe something was on top of it, like a building.
More than likely.
Yeah.
Yeah. More than likely.
Some kind of a temple structure.
Mm-hmm.
Man, it's so trippy.
I actually in the book talk about a story about this because there's another drawing of this that I found of Squire. I don't know that I have it in here. This is just another version of Squire, a draft that Squire made.
How much further away that bottom one is?
Well, you'll notice the orientation of those earthworks down at the bottom are different, right?
Oh,
And so, again, real world archaeological implications. Where are those earthworks actually located? Is it in this orientation or is it this orientation?
Looking for buried treasure. Where's the real X? Yeah, marking the spot
Well,
type
I wouldn't be searching for buried treasure, but
no, but I mean, just having the accurate locations of if we go there, can you say with confidence if the remains of the earthwork or structure's not there?
One of the things you'll notice here is the path of the river is different, and you'll notice that the one on the right, there's a much bigger bottomland down there than what appears on the left. One of the drafts that I have that Squire showed that there was another one of those long cursus type earthworks in that bottomland. And then when you get to the final print, that bottomland is gone and that earthwork is gone. And so it made me wonder, and I question about this in the book, did the course of the river change at some point during the time that Squire was doing the book, and that earthwork down below disappeared?
Got washed away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the only record of it is from this other earlier drawing from his field notes, actually. I don't know if I have it in here or not. Yeah, here it is.
There it is.
There it is.
So maybe it flooded or something?
Wow.
So, so there's another, kind of low bottomland down there, and, you kind of wonder about that.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to episode 53, part 1, Rediscovering Ohio's Ancient Earthworks with our buddy Jeffery Wilson. We appreciate Jeffrey so much for coming in studio. This episode was so epic, we had to split it up into 2 parts. If you guys enjoyed this one, let us know in the comments. Hit us up on Instagram, Facebook. Let us know. We have the part 2 of this episode is going to be airing next week on Monday, so keep an eye out for that. You guys can follow us at The Strange Road on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You also can find Jeffrey's work. All his links are in the description. But Friends of Serpent Mound is Jeffrey's group, and you can check everything they're doing out at serpentmound.org. And then also their Facebook group is Friends of the Serpent Mound. So go check out Jeffrey and all his work. And also Jeffrey's new book, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, expanded edition. Guys, this is an epic, epic book. And so you're not going to want to miss out on, this is only a chunk, a very, very, very tiny chunk of all the information Jeffrey has rediscovered. These maps, these drawings are just unbelievable. I also want to tell you guys about the 2nd annual Frogman Fest coming up March 2nd, 2024. The Strange Road will be back out there helping out in the AV room. And also, we're going to have a booth this year. So come say what's up to us. Come say hi. Tell us what you think about the show. We love the input, but we want to meet you guys. So come and hang out. It's going to be a great time. There's so many great speakers. But first, let me tell you, the Frogman Festival, you can find all the information at frogmanfestival.org. The conference center is the Oasis Conference Center in Loveland, Ohio. Tickets are $17.50 for adults in advance, $20 at the door, and kids 12 and under are free. The event is from 9:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. There's also some special movie screening that's going to be happening. That's going to be coming out. More information on that, but go check out frogmanfestival.org. We appreciate the hell out of each and every one of you guys. We're signing off. Peace, love, and chicken grease. We're out.